Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. This is our first program of this year. I call it the school year. Our first kickoff of 2 programs this fall, and next year we resume again after the holidays. So thank you all for coming. What a great turnout. I wanted to mention we're going to be passing around, if you haven't seen it yet, a survey about an eventual historical museum. Bob Thoreau's got a series of clipboards. If you would fill these out and give us your thoughts. We would be very interested to hear your input on an eventual historical society museum, a bricks and mortar location. Also, I have a number of membership forms. Right? For anyone that would like to join the historical society, we would love to have you. We have those up front as well. In addition to that, we have our shiny new list of programs this year that Monty coordinated once again for the 5th year in a row, I think, and did a wonderful job organizing our programs as well as getting these printed up. They're all over town at most of the restaurants and businesses in town, so if we've got a stack of them up front here as well. So, lastly, we're passing around an email sign-up sheet. If you would be kind enough, if you have an email address, to add it to our list so that we can loop you in with news, events, programs, and things that happen. So, thank you all again for coming, and I look forward to a wonderful program tonight. So, thank you all. Bonnie, you want to?
Thanks.
Well, hello, Hampshire. We are so glad you're here to talk about and hear about the amazing baseball banquets that went from 1919 to 1999, 80 years. And you know, before football, there was baseball. And before basketball, there was baseball. So there was a whole lot of baseball in the country and in the towns in the early days. And you know, back in the day, there was no television, no internet, no cell phones, right? No cell phones, internet. You know what we had?
Party lines.
Radio!
Party
and
lines.
So it was on the radio that we'd listen to those baseball games. And if the farmers were milking in the barn as scheduled at 4 o'clock, 4:30, right on the dot, they were either playing music on WLS or they were listening to the baseball game. Or if the mechanic was fixing his car, like Neil Kerman did at the Engel Garage over here, he was listening to the baseball game. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Well, maybe it's not a secret. But back in the day, fellas liked to gamble. You could find poker games pretty easy a couple times a week. You could find high stakes poker games. And sometimes somebody would bet the farm. Not a good idea. Don't bet the farm. Or you could find them rolling dice at McNamara's, which is now where the Copper Barrel is. Or at Chuck's Pub, Horace's dad, now the Cave, they'd be gambling over the shuffleboard or the pool table. And I'm told somewhere in this town, in the basement, on State Street, there's some kind of a board, telephones, and they were playing the horses. Oh, wow. I don't have that verified, it's a rumor, but there also was betting on the baseball games. So we are really pleased tonight to have 4 outstanding presenters that are going to talk to us about the baseball banquets. We have Bob Kudlicki, Lloyd Stover, followed by Don Edmonson, who gave us the idea and suggested the Historical Society present the baseball game. By the way, my name's Bonnie Engel. I'm president at the moment, and it's an honor. And then we also have the famous Orris Ruth. So we welcome you all, and we're glad you're here. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the invite. Even though I live in St. Charles, and I have for 33 years, Hampshire's still my hometown. I told that to somebody the other day, and they said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, it is. I can remember every house, probably who lived in it, which ones we could go to use the bathroom, get a sandwich, and we disappeared at like 8 in the morning, and our parents said, be back by dinner time. So that's my recollection. Before I get started with what I would like to say, there's someone I know that's watching, my classmate from the class of '74, Babs Wilcox. And I mention that because Babs's grandfather is one of the original founders, and Babs's dad, Bob, who also owned the pharmacy in town, was one of the ones that carried it on. So I told her I would shout out to her online. I won't say anything else about you, Babs. Okay. So I moved into town in '64. We were immigrants because we weren't an Allen, a Seiler, a Walker. We were the Polish family that moved in. So that's my first recollection of Hampshire. I probably went to the thing about the baseball banquet probably about 10 years. You kind of started when you were maybe 10 or 12. So I remember that part very well. You used to have to dress in a suit and a tie, and you used to stand outside. My recollection is outside the church area, St. Charles Borromeo, in a line to make a dash for whether you wanted to be in the multi-purpose room or you wanted to be in the gymnasium. Now, the multi-purpose room was where all the guests and celebrities were at, so everybody kind of made a dash for that. But it was a unique setup, and as the night went on, all the celebrities were up on the stage. My recollection is of the meals. My mom and a lot of the other members of the Altar and Rosary Society each went down to the Block Brothers, happened to be owned by my uncle at one time, and Dale Sester, and they would pick up 4 to 5 chickens, and they would cook them, maybe a day before. And then they would take all that down to the gymnasium, where there was a small kitchen and there was also a bigger kitchen. And they would be not only the people that prepared the food, along with some of the men of, I'm not sure if they had the Knights of Columbus at that time, but I know Bruce Froemming was one of the people that did that, Mike's dad.
Mashed potatoes.
Mashed potatoes, that was his gig. So it was a homemade meal, family style, but that's how it happened. And so then I think the ladies would turn around, go put on their Sunday best or Thursday best or whatever it was, and they would actually serve the meal to everybody. So it was a community effort. That's what I remember about it. The meals were great. One of the things that my mom did was I always asked her when she was serving the people, and she usually ended up in the celebrity room, if she would get me some autographs. So I dug this out of my plethora of things in the basement, and I'll just go through some of them. Some of them aren't really baseball players, but I have Dick Gordon. Now, he was a player for the Chicago Bears at one time. I have Ernie Banks. I have Stan Mikita, and I have Bobby Hall. Now, they're not obviously baseball players, but I will tell you how I got these. I went into Bungie Tires, in Elgin with my dad, with a piece of tape across my hockey stick, and they both signed it. I had the opportunity to run into both of them, Stan Mikita at O'Hare Airport, and I told him that I still had his autograph, and he said, "Thank you for telling me that." I ran into Bobby Hall in Geneva at a restaurant, and I told him the same story, and he said, "Thank you." So I have their, now departed, but I still have their, and it's still on the white tape, and it still looks pretty good. I also have Glenn Beckert's, Tubby Sibonini's, and then I have Charlie Grimm. I have Vince Lloyd, who was an announcer. I have Jimmy Enright, who I think wrote for the Sun-Times. I have Pete Ward, Rich Nye, who I believe was a pitcher, and Jose Cardinal. And this is actually on the doily they used to put under the glass of water for them. And then I have an odd one, and some of in the room will recognize this name. Mike Salagi, Celtics, 1969. I don't know how I don't remember when he did that, but he did it. And so I kept all that. So those are my recollections. Now, as you got older, if you were fortunate enough to know Bob Wilcox, which obviously I did because of Babs, and George, you got invited to their house beforehand. And I got the opportunity to do that. And my best recollection is there was a gentleman, he was probably an agent, and a ball player standing next to him. And this gentleman said to me, "This is Bucky Dent. You're going to see him in the majors someday." So that's my recollection of going to Bob's house. And then the lights would be flickered, and it was time to go, and you had to get to the church in time for the meal. There was another, and I know Lloyd's going to talk about him, but Bruce Froemming one time was there. And I went over to him and said hello, and I took his beer and I moved it this way, and he looked at me and goes, "Don't ever do that to me." So he was a pretty tough guy. Those are the things I remember. Again, the meals were great. I got plenty of autographs. The other thing I remember is, and I know Lloyd's going to maybe talk about this, when they passed out the cigars, Coach Ellett and Coach Rackow were just watching for one of us ball players to even think about picking one of those up, because we would have got coded right then and there on the spot. Those are some of my recollections. As they bring things up, I'm sure we'll all kind of have something else to add in. But anyway, thank you again for inviting me to do this. I appreciate it.
Well, my name is Lloyd Stover. I'm another immigrant from Burlington Central and grew up playing baseball for Burlington. Until my sophomore year, I came here for the Legion team, Hampshire Legion team, and I got to play for Hampshire finally. And then I went to ECC and played with Bob and John Benchley here from Hampshire. Then I went to NIU, and it was there that I came to my first banquet, and I was hooked. I was truly hooked. So I'm going to do a little of the history now. The banquet started with 10 people, 5 American League people and 5 National League people betting on the World Series. And it just so happened that betting is a key word there, because in 1919 is when it started, and that's when the Black Sox scandal was also happening. So we know the National League won that series. And by the way, it's good to see that Thames is here, because I know now we have at least 4 Sox fans here. So I don't know if you're interested. The founding members are Herb Bowman, A.F. Block, George Dice, Frank Drymiller, Art Hartman, Charles Johnson, John Oder, James Ream, George Wilcox, and Walter Wilkins. They started it all. So our hats off to them. When they first started the banquet, they had the banquet all over the place. They had Henpeck, I believe. Let me see where they... Hampshire Restaurant was, I think, one of the first ones. Then Hampshire Cook Shack, Pingree Grove, Coral Inn, Henpeck. Oh, I said, okay, Blue Moon, Village Hall. Then they moved it to Hampshire High School. And from there, in 1951, they started at the Catholic Church. Now, during the 40s and 50s, there were 250 people already coming. Before that, they only had room for 100 people. But in the 40s and 50s, they had it at Hampshire High School and were able to handle 250 people. But then, in the 60s, when the Cubs almost won in 1969, they had 470 people in that tiny church. And for the most part, they were in the 400s then, until they had the big baseball strike, which I will get into later. Let's see here. Now, the support staff, or the servers, the first ones were the M&M Club from the Methodist Church. I'm not sure what M&M means, but we know that they were the first ones who served. And then at the church, the ladies from the church served, and that was started in 1951. So 1951 all the way through 1997, they had everything done at the church. Now, Bob already talked a little bit about what happened in the gymnasium, and there were at least 3 rows of table, the whole length of the gym, filled, and I mean filled. And there could have been actually 4 to get 450 people there, but it was a great meal. Chicken almost every time. I think one time over here they served beef, but after the wonderful dessert, Bob talked about handing out 400 cigars. And if you can imagine what 400 cigars are like in that small gymnasium, it was rough. It was really rough. And of course, I had to have my first cigar then because everybody else had one. I had to try it too. Getting then to the speakers. Every year they had at least 2 speakers. And they ranged all the way from sports writers to radio personalities, television personalities. But here's what I think is amazing. Out of the speakers, there are 12 Hall of Fame people who were at the banquet. I'll just read them off. Ernie Banks, Billy Williams, Minnie Miñoso, Rogers Hornsby, who's probably the best hitter ever in the American League, the National League, Lou Boudreau. And then as far as announcers go, Jack Brickhouse, Milo Hamilton, Bob Elson, and Pat Hughes. He got in the Hall of Fame in a short time ago, 23, I believe. One basketball official, Jimmy Enright, who you brought up, he's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, not the Baseball Hall of Fame. And an umpire/player, Jocko Conlon. He played for the White Sox back in the 30s, I believe, or 40s, and he ended up being in the Hall of Fame along with the White Sox owner, Bill Veeck. So those are the 12 people who are Hall of Famers. Now, 3 umpires were very, very popular speakers. Bob mentioned Bruce Froemming. Bruce Froemming was at the banquet 21 times. And I'll get back to him later too. Larry Young. Larry Young was a student out at Oregon High School. My sister actually taught him in high school. And Jocko Conlon and Bruce Froemming, those were the 3 umpires. But they were lifers, shall we say. They came a lot. There were some almost perennials. Bob mentioned Tubby Simonini. Froemming, Jimmy Enright was there like 5 or 6 times. Dwayne Statz, he was a Cub announcer in probably the 80s, early 80s. Bill Gleason was there several times. Minnie Miñoso was there several times. And Gene Lamont, pretty much a local boy, he's from Kirkland. And he ended up coaching and managing the White Sox and the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he's still coaching in the big leagues. And then there's John Rooney, who was a White Sox announcer, who I'm quite sure will be in the Hall of Fame one day. I could go and list about 40 people who appeared at the banquet, but I don't know if everyone would appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Froemming. And read a little bit about what they said about him in the newspaper. They said that the little round man with the 5 feet 5 inch figure, regardless of which way you look at it, kept the crowd in stitches as he took them through the 1977 season month by month and related his controversial calls and so forth. And he thought it was strange that the people applauded the White Sox third baseman, Eric Soderholm. He had a .978 fielding percentage, and that was like a Gold Glove appearance. And he thought it was strange that the audience should be happy with Soderholm when he just completed his 20th season with another perfect 1,000%, having never missed a call all year. But Bruce would come up on the stage, and he wanted everyone to boo him. So of course everybody got together, and you never heard so many boos in your life, even at a baseball stadium. And then he would keep egging people on, come on, come on. And as soon as everybody was done, he'd say, "Kiss my rear," shall we say. But one of the finer nights was in 1984 banquet, because Bruce Froemming was there, and he had made a controversial call on a Cubs pitcher, Milt Pappas. Milt Pappas was one pitch away from a perfect game, nobody reaching first base. 3-2 count on a pinch hitter, and Froemming called it a ball. And to his dying day, Milt Pappas will swear that it was a strike. So at the banquet, here they are, 15 feet from each other, and Bruce Froemming saying, "It's a ball, it was a ball." Milt Pappas, "It was a strike." And they went back and forth. Now, they kept it pretty clean. You didn't have to worry about fisticuffs or anything, but it was quite a night there. And my memories of Milt Pappas go back even farther yet. 1960, my first White Sox game. I was 5 years old, and I can remember that night, everything that happened that whole night. We sat about 15 feet from the field, and Nellie Fox, the White Sox MVP the year before of the American League, and Milt Pappas were standing there talking together. I think they came from towns that were close together. So Milt says to Nellie, "Let me see your glove, Nellie." Nellie hands him his glove. Milt Pappas throws it about 40 feet up into the stands. If you can imagine, if you could have seen the look on Nellie's face, it was unbelievable. But of course they passed it down right away, but that's the kind of guy Milt Pappas was. In 1994, they handed these babies out, 75th annual Hampshire baseball supper, the year of no World Series. They had a strike, and halfway through the season, there was no more baseball. But they did have the banquet still. And it was one of the lowest attended banquets ever, because people were fed up with the players. And it took several years before it started building up again, but that was the reason. It was just no way people wanted to come. And they handed out these to everybody who came, and I figured there were probably not many left, and everyone is saying, "Oh, I'm sure there's plenty of these left." So that's kind of interesting. Now, after that time, we come into the 90s, it was a little easier to get speakers for the banquet, because not only could you get maybe someone from the Sox and the Cubs or an announcer, but you could get people from the Rockford Cubs, you could get people from the Kane County Cougars, and so pretty soon that stage up there had about 6 or 7 speakers for the night instead of just 2. So that really did help. I have banquet humor. Now, I already told you some of the Bruce Froemming stories, but Larry Young, the umpire from Oregon, Illinois, he said he threw 3 people out of games that year. Only 3, which is kind of amazing, I think. He threw out Carlton Fisk. And so Gene Lamont was the Sox manager, and Gene Lamont came out and and Larry Young said, well, I did him a favor. He didn't feel well and he was tired. He said, what? Lamont challenged Young. Young said he was sick and tired of my horse bleep calls. He also said that he was umpiring behind the plate when Rod Carew, who was one of the finest hitters in the league and is now a Hall of Famer, Rod Carew, he called a strike on him, and Carew looked at him like, he said, where was that pitch at? And so Larry Young, being a little embarrassed, it was his first year, he said, come on, Rod, don't you know you can't end a sentence with a preposition? trying to get his mind off it. So Rod Carew says, okay, take it this way. Where was that pitch at, idiot? And he didn't say idiot. He said another word that I can't repeat here. Now, Bruce Froemming said that his eyesight was perfect. And somebody said, well, how do you know it's perfect? He said, I can see the sun. It's 93 million miles away. Okay. I was going to talk a little bit about the parties afterward, but these two fellas, they know more about the parties than I do, because they were at Don's house. So I'll let him talk about that. But for the Hampshire baseball dinner, there's several people who did a lot of things for years and years. Ralph Seiler, Bob Wilcox, Harvey Kappen was the announcer for 40 plus years, and he had the most golden voice you ever heard on a microphone. He was tremendous. Charlie Sabin, Chet Roush. Now, Chet Roush was good friends with the Cubs, and he would get a lot of the Cub announcers and so forth to be able to come and speak. Bill Zink, Leo Zink, Milt Awe. The list goes on. I'm sorry if I forgot. I'm sure I forgot several staunch supporters. But I think that the ultimate compliment came the second to the last year. Pat Hughes, the Cubs announcer, was one of the speakers. And he just had a tremendous time, thanked me all over the place when he left. And then about 2 or 3 years later, I was sitting in my office down in Lily Lake, and my secretary said, Pat Hughes is on the phone. I said, Pat Hughes? So, of course, I went in right away and talked to him. He said, when's your next banquet? And I said, well, Pat, we don't have them anymore. We ran out of places to have the banquet. And he said, that is a shame. He said, that is the finest banquet I've ever attended. So I think that's a feather in the cap of Hampshire baseball dinner right there. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Well, hello, my name's Don Edmonson. I'd like to thank the Historical Society for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. And whilst it's true, I did make a suggestion that they might want to cover this event. No good deed goes unpunished, so here I am speaking at it. So. Anyway, I got to go back to you because My family moved to Hampshire in 1960. My dad, Bill Edmondson, was a sales rep, a regional sales manager for Wayne Feeds out of Quincy. And we moved here in 1960 from Porriston, Illinois. Lived out on a little drafty house out on Route 72. And then in 1962, on March 21st, my father, Bill Edmondson, was killed as a passenger in a car wreck. And the only reason I'm mentioning it is, you never know what events, happen and transpire to get you where you're going. And so as a result, I think my mom just decided, and she had kids from 15 down to 4 of them, that she just said, we're not moving anymore. We're going to put down some roots here in Hampshire. So we moved to the corner of Grove and State Street in Hampshire. And lo and behold, our next door neighbor was Howard Runge. He was also one of the organizers, and back in those early days, he also was the American League representative. So he would have the cocktail party over at his place for the American Leaguers. And on the state sides of the street was Art and Helen Hartman. And they really got us set up in Hampshire and made us feel comfortable. And I think back about those days, about Hampshire. Baseball was about it. I mean, there was no other sports aside from school sports that were organized, but baseball was. And Hampshire had the full gamut. We had 2 minor Little League teams. We had a couple Little League teams. Beyond that, we had a Colt League team. We had Pony League team. And we had the American Legion team. Took us all the way from 7 years old up until you graduated. And then back in the early 60s, and these guys probably know more about that than I do, but I remember Hampshire used to have a town team, and they would play other teams from towns around the area. So it's not so far stretched that Hampshire, one of the longest events that they ever had, was a baseball banquet. Kind of goes hand in glove, if you will. But so that's how we got here. And the event itself was just super. I mean, there's no words that you can describe it but that. Made you proud to be from Hampshire. You'd have big league ball players and announcers and umpires turn out for this event every year. He stole my thunder a little bit with the Bruce Froemming joke with Gene Lamont. Yeah, I love that story. And he had the place rolling. And they would boo him when he came in, It was always in good fun, good-natured. Like Bobby said, the food was great, on time, hot, filled everybody up. And we got to the program, and it was just a barrel of laughs. And for something that started out as a bet between 10 guys in 1919 to come along and last for 80 years, at a variety of locations. It's just remarkable, really. And it was a lot of fun, always was a lot of fun to attend. But things like that banquet, that baseball supper, they don't happen on their own. They just don't. There's got to be people that organize and volunteer to organize it. And it goes way back. I mean, these guys like George Wilcox and Art Hartman and Harv Hartman and Bob Wilcox, Hap Drymiller. The list goes on and on and on, and it really is kind of a who's who of Hampshire that was involved in this thing over the years. I remember my dad kind of got involved helping out the committee in probably the early to mid-70s. And he did it because he said that Bob Wilcox was doing the thing pretty much on his own, by himself, and had been for a number of years. So it's just, it's amazing, the guys, and they kept it going. I read some stories from Hampshire Register articles where they wanted to keep it going until they reached 100 years. And it's a shame that they weren't able to do that, but it sure had a pretty long run for the time it was. You know, moving to Hampshire was good for our family. We loved being in Hampshire. But another good thing came out of it. My mom met Ralph Seiler. And Ralph was really involved with the communities that he lived with, be it Burlington or Hampshire. And I had no idea that in the mid-70s he decided to get involved in that. I do remember the cocktail parties as they started out. I think Howard Runge might have hosted a few, maybe Art Hartman, talked about the American League, of course, Art Hartman, but the Wilcoxes, George Wilcox and then Bob Wilcox, they would host pretty much all the National League ones, and what fun they were, you know. I remember I came home from college. It was one of the last banquets that I attended, and I get home, and lo and behold, there's Bucky Dent in our living room, you know, and quite the surprise, but he's a nice guy, and he got up close and personal with those guys. You know, the town, men would be able to let their hair down a little bit too, which is always kind of fun seeing them attend this event. I remember sometimes a little ribald even, but I remember at this cocktail party at my mom and dad's house, God knows where my dad got these, but he had drink coasters that were fashioned to look like an athletic supporter. Yeah, you know, lest those highballs leave a mark on the furniture, you know. But there'd be things like that these guys would be joking around about, and you get to see another side of them that you really didn't get to see all the time, and that was always kind of special. Oh yeah, my dad, now most people here know that I'm a White Sox fan, but I didn't start out that way. Yeah, my grandma, she was a Cub fan, and I remember sprinting home from kindergarten to watch a leadoff man and, you know, sit down and watch the Cubbies game. But then Ralph Seiler became my stepdad, and I think it was probably about 7, 8 years of the slow drip, 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 drip. And the advent of WFLD, Channel 32, when they started carrying the White Sox games at night. That he converted me. I was converted. So, but committees, very important to this event, and I wish I could remember them all. I'm glad that you mentioned Fred Rackow, and Leo Zink was one that I, didn't think you mentioned. Now I come to this part where I've got it noted, the usual suspects. Growing up in Hampshire back in the 60s and 70s, pretty reasonably sure of a couple of things. If you needed music and a dance, you're probably listening to Chet Roush, without a doubt. And if you needed an MC for any event, Harvey Kappan was your go-to guy. I mean, that guy, I remember being amazed at Harv. He was just so easy in front of a crowd. And just, it was natural to him almost. But then later on at that same party where they had Bucky Dent at my mom and dad's place, Harv was there with Jim Enright. And and Bruce Froemming. He told me his secret. Those three guys, they would go to both parties. And so he'd get to know all the players in advance, kind of get a chance to talk to them and, you know, get more relaxed with them, kick around a few stories. And he was really amazing at being master of ceremonies. Next guy is Jim Enright. He's mentioned him being in the NCAA, you know, officiating Hall of Fame, I think. But he was the sports columnist for one of the Chicago papers. Was it the Sun-Times? Yeah. So you knew that in addition to the Hampshire Register, you would get to see a story usually in the Sun-Times about the Hampshire Baseball Banquet. And so pretty far reach in those days for a small village such as we were back then. I was going to tell my Bruce Froemming story, but he was just a special guy. My brother-in-law reminded me last weekend that he was just a gruff guy. Could be, but he was funny as heck. He would, my brother-in-law went to one with my dad with banquets, and some guy out in the audience asked a question of him, said something to the effect, you know, a lot of the catchers, they didn't like Bruce very much. Somebody would throw a fastball and they'd just move their glove and they'd go back and it would hit Bruce Froemming. And so the guy asked Bruce Froemming, he says, "Does that hurt?" And Bruce Froemming says, "That's the guy to stand up." You know, everybody could see who it was. He goes, "You idiot, what do you think?" You know, that thing. That hurt a lot. The guest speakers that I saw, that I remember seeing, kind of dwelling from the shallow well that is my memory. I remember Joy Piccolo showing up to one of those events. The widow of Brian Piccolo, Chicago Bears running back that died of cancer. Randy Hundley, I remember that event with him. And Glenn Beckert, I do remember that one. Ernie Banks, I was there, that was my first one. And I got my picture taken with him, and I also have an autograph. Can't find the autograph book right now, but I'm sure it'll turn up. Vince Lloyd, another broadcaster. J.C. Martin, catcher for the White Sox. Carlos May, first baseman for the White Sox. Gene Lamont. Gene Lamont was a close friend of my dad, you know, and Dad knew him since he was coming up through the baseball ranks back in Kirkland. And I've already mentioned Bucky Dent a couple of times, but it sure was special to attend those events. And its impact on the village, I think, you know, back in the day, I know it was an eagerly anticipated event. Everybody saved the date for the baseball supper. And I mean, that next to old-fashioned days, maybe, back in the time, was eagerly anticipated and very well attended all the time. I guess I've gone on for too long, but the Historical Society has, I really want to thank all you volunteers for that. It's something, you know, I see some of the programs you have, and, you know, it saves the legacy of Hampshire, kind of gives some history to those coming in of the things that went on in not so ancient history, you know, but history. And I think it's very worthwhile. And I want to thank all of you that are involved with that for what it is you do. And with that, thank you for having me.
The Hampshire Township Historical Society welcomes you tonight to our September 25th, 2025 program. It is our reflection, as you noted, on the amazing baseball banquet that was held in Hampshire. My name is Orris Ruth, and evidently I'm the eldest here because I was born in Hampshire in 1942, not a transplant. But they turned out okay. My reflection goes back before these gentlemen, back to 1958. Young kid, riding my Schwinn bicycle in the one-block business district of Hampshire, talking to my friends, and one said, "That's a baseball player." I said, "Really?" You know, I followed baseball on the radio, so I walked up to him with my bicycle, and I said, "Are you a baseball player?" He says, "Yeah, I play for the Cubs. I'm here for the baseball banquet." I don't remember his name, but I'm a Cub fan. My father, Charles Ruth, he had a tavern in the middle of the block on the west side of State Street called Chuck's. He had been in business since the end of Prohibition in 1936. My dad, having the only pool table in town, would have people reserve pool table time during the event so that they could come in and play pool. Cost? 50 cents an hour. Getting back to the start of the banquet, of course, it was in 1919, the end of World War I. It was the war to end all wars. It was also called the Great War. The first World Series game was the 16th at that time, and the White Sox against the Cincinnati Red, and the White Sox lost. This turned into the Black Sox scandal, as mentioned, because the baseball players were paid to lose the World Series. On banquet day, people would start to arrive in Hampshire about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I believe the dinner started around 5, is that correct? Or I don't know when it started. Started afterwards. My dad would pre-mix 2 large glass containers. One was for gin martinis, the other was for Manhattans. Once I had to go to Siler's grocery store, 2 doors down, to get stuffed olives and maraschino cherries. Behind the bar were 3 boxes of cigars, Dutch Master, Harvester, and White Owl. I went to the liquor store, which is now on the south side of Hampshire along Route 72. The only place in town you can buy a cigar, $4 and some cents for 1 cigar, no guarantee that it's fresh. The cigars back in 1958 in that area were 25 cents. The bar would get so full of cigar smoke that you could cut it with a knife. And then all the people got cigars up at the church, and you can imagine. People would get together at friends' home before the banquet, or the only other place open was the taverns, and they were full. The taverns were Zinc on the south end of State Street, my dad's Chuck in the middle of State Street, McNamara next to him, and Cap Oder across the street. All the taverns had basements. After the banquet, men would gather to play poker. My dad's basement had a table, chairs, floor lamps, and of course, ashtrays. The players were local farmers who were customers. They all had money. Good farmland in Hampshire. Dad would give one of the guys the key, tell them when they got through playing poker, go out the back door and lock up. He was going home. It was my job to clean up the basement. There was quarters and $50 on the floor. I now think that was my reward from my dad for cleaning the basement. I found no paper whatsoever. One night, cap order, after going home from his business, 3 o'clock in the morning, was roughed up, mugged, and robbed. 3 o'clock in the morning. There was 3 men from Rockford who were later arrested. This put a damper on the poker game, late night poker games. In reference to Minnie Miñoso, he was at the banquet. He visited all the taverns in town. All, of course, got a beverage. Nice guy. He passed away in 2015, and of course, he was a Baseball Hall of Famer. The 1944, as mentioned, was canceled due to the players on a strike, which began in August. It was the 75th annual Super Bowl, and of course, I also have a cup, which will go to the Historical Society. One of the speakers, once mentioned again, was Bruce Froemming. He was behind the plate umpire at Wrigley Field. He could tell you stories that the newspapers could not print. But everybody was glad to see him come, and he lived in Rockford, Illinois. I took over my dad's tavern in '66 after getting out of the military service. The tavern is now located on Washington Avenue called The Cave, and my son David runs it. We're going towards the 100th anniversary. I won't be here, but I hope he makes it. The supper was not the same in the 60s or 70s. There was no more downtown gathering, at least in the taverns. They probably went to local homes, which held different people. Maybe about 5 or 6 in Hampshire, the well-known people. There's no more martinis or Manhattans behind the bar. The cigars are still there, and the cigars are still there after the banquet. Some people were completely unaware of the banquet. There's no talk in the bar about who was there. There's no talk in the bar as to the banquet even being held. So I don't know what happened in the 70s and beyond. I do know that they started to bring their children to the banquet, their sons, maybe a daughter, don't know. But now the speakers had to watch their language. And no more cigar smoke. So there are things that might have contributed. I heard that they had difficult time now getting speakers due to the cost. The ladies did not want to make the dinner anymore. And I don't really know what transpired. But for 80 years in our little town, can you believe such an organization existed? What a beautiful, beautiful event. It will never, ever be repeated. I did see the Cubs win the World Series. 80 years old for the banquet. Proud to be a Hampshireite. Proud to see you people here. Some of you are recognized. Some people older than me. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments anyone would like to make or ask?
When they ended this, well, during the time up at the Catholic Church, women were not allowed in there, correct? For the banquet?
No.
Only to serve the
Plausible
food.
deniability is what you want to say.
But I remember that the altar and rosary served the food, and then afterwards, when everybody went to the gym, they all went to the multi-purpose room where they got fed.
Right.
Whatever, but I don't think there was one time a woman, though, was on the speaker panel, though, wasn't it?
Joy Piccolo.
Was she the only one?
Yeah, I think so.
Because I remember at one time no women were allowed in there at the time.
No.
But then I did hear later on that there was a female guest, but that was her then.
Yeah, I was at that one. I don't, I could be wrong on this, but I don't think until it was much after it moved to the Catholic Church that children were allowed, kids were allowed.
I don't ever remember seeing kids there until later on, and then they weren't little kids there, more like towards high school or middle school or something like that.
Yeah.
Teeners, yeah.
Yeah.
And then why did they end it then? What, the ladies didn't want to serve it anymore, or
No.
or the church didn't want to do it?
Well, it went to the VFW for 2 years, I believe.
Oh, after it left there?
Yes. And then that was sold,
Right.
and there was actually no place to have the banquet
Didn't have a
run.
big enough place.
We
for it.
were talking about maybe having it at, because I was on the committee then. We were talking about having it maybe at the fire department. I know Burlington always used to have big wing things at their fire department. I didn't know about Hampshire, but I called Ralph Seiler and I said, Ralph, I'm working on getting some speakers, and he said, don't bother. He said, we can't have the Hampshire baseball dinner in Burlington. and he went on after that to say that there was just no place that was big enough that could handle it anymore. And
Was it too big for the Catholic Church? Is that why they didn't
Catholic,
want to do it?
I don't know why
I don't
we had
remember what
to
happened there.
go from the Catholic. I'm not sure if it had to do with laws or whatever, what you could do as far, and smoke for sure.
Yeah.
They wouldn't allow that anymore. But
Well, you said that, I think one of you said that you moved somebody's beer. Did they serve beer at the
No,
church?
that was at Bob Wilcox's.
Oh, okay, because I think there was no alcohol in the church at that time.
Well, no, probably before and afterwards.
Well,
I think one of my other memories, not that I was involved, because I was too young, were the card games that went on afterwards, including a number of the ball players that kept going until wee hours of the morning, or maybe the next morning, as they left town. I think the other thing too, I have a memory, it's not particular this. Dry Miller and Cray used to attract a real bunch of people from outside the town. You'd see a ball player, or would say White Sox on the thing, and they'd come all the way out here to be able to pick up the meats that time Dry Miller and Cray produced, which is says something about it. I think the other thing is, the thing about a town of, I think when I lived here, it was, before I moved, it was 1,250, maybe worse, I'm sure way less than that. To attract those kind of people for probably $100 a person to do this. To come out all this way, because it was, a hump to come out here, it is beyond description. I just, you couldn't believe it. You couldn't get a ball player that was the 24th person on the squad nowadays for less than 10 grand. Wow. So,
The prima donnas.
yes.
yep.
that's why it was pretty nice at the end that there were minor league clubs around, because they came for nothing just to get the word out about their teams. And so we had at least, another couple speakers to last a few minutes, but people wanted the ball players more so than the reporters, and I understand that completely. Now, some of the reporters were very good speakers too, but the ball players were where it's at.
Were efforts taken later, after it had ended, a couple years later maybe, to bring it back? Or to try?
Not to my knowledge.
Not that I know.
It only takes people time and money. I mean, what's hard, is it?
Yeah.
So gentlemen, thank you so much. And we appreciate the presentation. We appreciate all our viewers around the